Hello everyone, welcome to Coffee Cup Enlightenment. Today I'm going to talk about what is a measurement of one's enlightenment. And of course you already are enlightened, but what sort of measures the truth of who you are, this enlightenment that you are? What can be used to measure this sort of the true essence of who someone is? And how can it be measured within I guess time, you can say, like from 1 year to the next. And using these plates again, always in the videos there's made reference which is you, which is this observer, and this is the mind. So basically a measurement of what governs how much you realize yourself as this observer, which you already are it, so you already are enlightened, so you can't be enlightened because you already are it. But what reveals your identity more to yourself is that your identity no longer mistakes the mind as your identity. And so one major aspect of the mind is the inner chatter. So when your awareness has reached such a level, first of all, the inner chatter doesn't do anything anymore. It won't generate any corresponding emotions when you're observing it in that state of awareness and recognition of yourself as this, as the awareness. And second of all, they don't even come anymore. So there's a great reduction in how much inner chatter you experience within your day. When the awareness is quite obscured, then there's lots of inner chatter that come through your day. And when your awareness is self-realized, the inner chatter doesn't even come anymore. So the reduction of inner chatter is one measurement. Another way of measuring the recognition of your enlightenment that you already are is your ability to switch off the chatter at any moment. So for myself, I've been practicing self-inquiry for about 9 years, or it's probably been even more than that now. It's probably been 11, 12 years now, but I'm at the point now where I could just beam like an eagle at a fort. My self-awareness is so much realized that my eye is just like an eagle that beams like a laser beam at the fort, and it actually uses the fort now to the point of turning it into a mirror and realizing myself as this as more. And what normally got used as a source of nudges now gets used as a source of joy. The joy is already who we already are, and by using a fort, it brings about the realization of this as yourself even more, which is joy, and then you experience joy. Or the word joy can be described as many things, even just a sense of lightness more. Or and in some circumstances, it doesn't happen to me much anymore, but it used to be the case in the early, in the first few years, where forts used to get turned, were so recognized as just forts, and these were old, repetitive judgments that caused many nudges continually throughout my day. Eventually, when they were exposed and seen for what they were, which was just a fort, and my awareness beamed at it to such a point that it totally recognized itself as this. This fort exploded and turned into euphoria. So it's almost like one way of describing it is like all your attention you keep giving it through your identification, the fort. It's almost like it's not necessarily true, but you can describe it in this way. It's like you're giving it energy, this fort, and that's what's keeping it alive. And take away the energy of life that you gave it, the fort is just neutral. And this energy, it's almost like it's only, as I described, it's only sort of happen in the first few years, and it very rarely happens to me anymore. But a massive euphoria rush came, and it felt like warm oil being poured over your head, and it felt amazing. And it was like that energy was returned from that thought that was so identified with. Now it was just seen as a thought, and it was freed from its identification with me as this. So no longer did I identify with this thought anymore, and all the energy just returned back. And then what happened as this euphoria was experienced, I've noticed as it's happened many times, it sort of subsides. Like it goes up to like 100% in the first seconds that I experience it, and then it feels good for a few minutes, and then like 3% of it stays with me forever. Like it can't go anymore, and so that sort of remains. And then another thought can come, and then I disidentify with that, and a massive euphoria comes, and now I'm up to like 6% of continual peace and ease that cannot be moved anymore. It's now recognized as my identity, who it already was. So it's like a remembering you already are peace, you already are clarity, you already are enlightenment. What's just needed is to see this thought, and you can use it. It's a gift. Although its thoughts are so much associated as causing us nudges and all these sorts of disturbances, if you stare at it enough, then you'll realize yourself as this, and then the thought just gets seen as neutral. And that's the gift of the things that we become identified with. When they no longer become identified with, our sense of joy re-emerges to the surface. It was already there. We didn't create it through thoughts. It was just sort of like the thoughts were just, all our energy was given to the thoughts, and taken away from the life energy that we already were. So that's one way of measuring it. And the other way is, it's a pretty important way as well, is all the concepts of who you think you are. So over life you say that I'm a this person, and I'm a that person, and I'm a should have person, and I'm a could have person, and I'm a would have person. And all these identifications, which are thoughts, they become your sense of identity. And for obviously every single person has many different variations to this, but generally speaking, you can pretty much categorize them probably within a few dozen categories, which I'm sure psychologists have done, to add categories to what the enlightenedness that we already are, what it becomes identified with, and what particular categories. There's not probably much variations, and when you see that all these two are just thoughts, then even those can eventually expose and reveal the enlightenedness that you already are, and all the thoughts of who you think you are become meaningless. They don't have any importance anymore. And the reason why they don't have any importance anymore is because this has been realized. So the only reason why importance exists is because they are a temporary substitute to your unknowingness and realization of what you already are. So when you do know what you already are, you can't deliberately see thoughts as important anymore. It just can't happen. So they're only a temporary substitute. The importance given to it is because this is unrealized. When this is realized, you can't give importance. It just can't happen anymore. One substitutes the other. One implies the absence of the other. And I did want to mention also on this video that also, like, good or even enlightened thoughts, we can even become identified with them, and even they can create nudges. So every identification, even if it's an enlightened idea, you've now created your identity as this, but you're not that, you're this. So that's where even such noble and so-called enlightened ideas, even if you become identified with them, you're then doing the same thing again, which is identification with thoughts. And all that's needed to realize our enlightenment that we already are is the ceasing of identification with thoughts, which is ultimately mind. If we didn't have a mind, then we would just be the enlightenedness that we already are. But to some extent, we wouldn't realize the enlightenedness that we would live it. And to some extent, like this, there's no proof of this, but it's almost like the animal kingdom. The animal kingdom just lives in pure oneness, in the enlightened state, and they have sense recognition of nature events, of tsunamis before it happens, of earthquakes before it happens. There's many reports of the animal kingdom, how they sense earthquakes in the zoos, before it happens, and animals flee to higher ground before tsunamis and all these sorts of things. And that's their natural state of connectedness with the oneness that everyone is. But our oneness is, which we already are. It's focusing on thoughts, and when it ceases identification with thoughts, your union returns. Doesn't return, but your recognition, your awareness returns back to what it already is, which is already in the oneness. So yeah, even good ideas. Eventually, these are also subject for your awareness to look at and see that you don't even need that. You already are. I don't even need to say, but goodness is who you already are. But you don't even need to use that, because then that's in the judgmental realm, even to use such a word. You don't need to give any label to this awareness. It's just so beautiful as it is. I did have an experience I have spoken about in the previous video about a year ago how I had an experience of like a very strong realization of enlightenment for a dream. And in that dream, I spent the whole day in a state of absolute very high levels of peace. And I even saw, when I went out into the night sky, the sky was glowing orange. And then the next day when I woke up, I still had this shadow sense of conceptual self, which I still have right now. It feels like, and I have evidential experience of what it felt like when I didn't have this in my perception. It was so light. It felt like 10 million warm baths of water. Like it felt so amazing. But a week ago I did have another similar dream again. It was probably a different dream, and this time I was in two succession dreams early in the morning. And in the dream, this consciousness was like going for a swim, and it was so blissful, and it was looking for the identity of Peter Dimitriou, and it couldn't find it anywhere, and it was so nice and so beautiful. And but that didn't cause a massive shift in my state of peace when I woke up that morning. But what I do realise is, from that, what happened 1 year ago, it's almost like, again, how I described earlier in this video. After that one-day event, the next day I woke up and the heaviness somewhat returned, and I still had this identity, which I still have right now. But probably like a good 20% of that peace stayed with me over the last 1 year. It hasn't gone. So, and that's why I say, like, I feel enlightenedness is never ending. It keeps on going, and there's no end to it. But it just seems to build ever more peace. But it's not really building the peace. It's exposing the peace that you really are. There's infinite depths to your peace, and only by peeling away each layer of thought that blocks up your level of peace that you already are, that you feel this more lightness, and it just keeps on going. And is there such a thing as total enlightenment? I don't know. Like, I do feel that in those days, that 1 year ago, and also when I've experienced in the dreams, it feels really, really amazing. It seems like there's no further you can go than that. Like, it's just so blissful. So, I don't know. I am open to the point, possibly, there is such thing as total enlightenment and total self-realization. But as it stands now, I do have the ability to generate nudges still. But what happens is, compared to how it was like 11, 12 years ago, is when a nudge is created, I'm now able to recognize within about 1 to 2 seconds that what's caused it, that it's just a thought. and very, very rarely does that externalize to people and situations. It's very rare. Um, Even if my ability to have my buttons push um, are much better than they were 12 years ago, because I don't have any buttons anymore. All the judgment structures that used to be there, um, that were very prolific 12 years ago, they're just not there anymore. So there is no buttons to push anymore. There's only very little buttons at the moment. So it's still possible that nudges can be created within me, but my ability to detect and become aware of it is now instantaneous, pretty much. Um, I don't have any. Before, it used to be like 6 months before I realised I thought, was creating a nudging effect. But now I spend pretty much, it feels like 99% in a state of ease and clarity throughout the whole day. The mind chatter, if it wants to go, I'm aware of it, and I could switch it off at any moment. And I can use the mind chatter to stare at it to such a point that it actually creates joy and more lightness. So it's now because the reverse effect. Before all these thoughts identified with caused nudges, now the alchemy has happened, where my awareness is so prevalent and so self-realized that it beams like an eagle, like a laser beam onto thoughts, and not in a destructive manner. It's just seeing that that's just a thought, in an innocent manner, in a gentle manner. And the more I want to bring it in, I can bring my attention back into the body, and even that can bring what's happened to me for many years, like a shivering, sort of like as I described before in this video, like an oil being poured on top, I said before, but it really feels like an oil poured up my back and out of my top of my head. And that's what used to happen in the first years when I started self-inquiry. I'm not saying that any of these things are going to happen to people who practice self-inquiry. They may not. For you, it might just be a slow way. For you, it might not be any way. It might not seem to work, self-inquiry. And the recognition of this doesn't seem to be activated for some time, but maybe it might happen later. But for me, I have had, as a young age, like a oil poured up the back of my head, and it pours out of the top of my head. So it feels like the tingling, like you're getting, I can do it right now a little bit. There's a tingling pouring out of the shoulders and out of the top of the head. And this used to happen probably, let's say, once a year as a kid. And then later, as I practiced self-inquiry, I realized that was my attention realized on itself like a mirror, and that's where the tingling came from. And even right now, if I direct my attention back in the body, away from thinking or speaking, then it even generates lightly. And if I stop talking, I could probably do it again, where I just feel this tingling. I can do it at pretty much will now, as long as my mind subsided and it's gone quiet, and through bringing my attention to myself as awareness. And this is all invisible. It's all done inside. It's a feeling realization now. I'm only using these plates as a physical explanation to explain what happens in me, but that's sort of, I feel these plates are a very good description of what happens in me, and can also demonstrate what can happen in you and what has already happened in you, because self-inquiry happens to everyone. Even if you don't know about it, you're already doing it. There's many times where you've already disidentified with thoughts, as sort of described in other videos, where it naturally happens, self-inquiry, and you feel these shifts in your life of between lightness, and then the nudges come back, and then more lightness, and maybe you get more nudges in your life, and back and forth, and this and that. But the evidence that you're experiencing these shifts from lightness to nudges is evidence that everyone's already doing self-inquiry. The talking about it on this video is only the deliberate act of it. Is understanding the mechanics and see if you can practice it in day-to-day situations. And so what I did for day-to-day life situations was I waited till I got a nudge. So I waited for what people did, what people didn't do, what was said, what wasn't said, what happened and what didn't happen. And I waited for these things seemingly to cause the trigger, and I saw that it was just a thought about these life scenarios of what happened, what didn't happen, what was said, what was didn't said, what someone did and what someone didn't do, are the seeming 6 causes of what causes nudges. But when you do self-inquiry, you'll see that it's your identification with the thought about these 6 situations of reality that actually cause the nudge. And if you didn't identify with the thought, then you start to see these 6 situations as neutral. And it's your awareness that looks at the thought, and it looks at these 6 situations. It sees what happened. It's ultimately your thoughts about the situation of what happened. That when you identify with the judgments about it, that's what's creating it. And there's different levels of judgments that create different levels of nudges. The more stronger the nudge and the more you're identified with determines how much nudge you experience and how much you miss seeing the neutrality of that situation. So, and that's the measurement also of how nudges are created. It's the particular type of judgment of the mind and how much it is believed in, which ultimately determines how much you're identified with it as coming from you. I'm the one that's making the judgment, and then and then more judgments follow that and create a cycle and a circle of who you think you are for having that judgment, and that's just the whole cycle of the way thoughts work and how we become identified with. There's further cycles that come in and then turn those judgments into our identity, but they're not. From what I've experienced over the many years, it's the absence of all these judgments that were so prolific and part of my life that all my school friends from 20 years ago said, that's who Peter is, that's who he is, that's who his personality is. And when the absence of it was gone, because these structures were just, I conducted self-inquiry and I saw that these thoughts were just thoughts and these judgments were just judgments, and they were no longer coming into my field of vision. It was interesting to see like an old school friend that I hadn't seen in 20 years. I helped him move house, hadn't seen him yet, as soon as we met, without any words, he remembered all the old things of the past, and you could see it in his face. But these structures weren't part of my psyche anymore, weren't part of my vision anymore, or part of my experience. They'd gone. And it only took like about 15 seconds of our silent interaction, and he realised he could see that, and all of a sudden you just saw his face just so totally go clear and peaceful, and forgiveness happened in a moment without any words exchanged. And but that's just an example of like that all these stuff, they're not our identity. And if you make it into someone's identity, then you're only limiting them, and you're only slowing the process down of their self-realization of who they are. And ultimately, if not you're making it, you're identifying with your own judgments about who they are. It's also a limitation on yourself of realization. Because ultimately it doesn't really matter what you project, what these judgments are projecting onto others. That they must also hold the same for blocking yourself. So it doesn't matter, and that's why it said, what you do unto others, you're doing unto yourself. And that's where enlightenment really starts to create a shift in yourself, is where you don't give a stuff about, really about what it's going to do. There's some sort of like a selfishness that happens, but it's not really selfish. It's what's it going to do for yourself. Don't worry about all the good things, all these grandiose fantasies about what goodness can be done. What's it going to do for me? And when you really start investigating in self-inquiry and start experiencing evidentially the lessening of thoughts and their impact on your reality. So it's not a belief-based system, it's not a thought-based system, it's got nothing to do with any of that. In fact, it's the opposite of that. It's the absence of thoughts and beliefs. Then you're actually being quite selfless, because by getting in touch with this, then you're of greater service to everyone and everything. And that's where true service happens. You know, as I said before in the video, even if you've got really great identifications, if it's coming from this, sorry, if you're in the absence of the realization of this, and these are guiding your life, even if they're good ideas, but you haven't realized this, then that's all you're going to be bringing to the situation is your identified state, which is this, even if they're good ideas. You know, and that's why it says the road to hell is paved with good intentions. This is the road to hell with good intentions. They're good thoughts, but you're still in the identified state. And no matter what you do, you're only bringing the identified state to that other person, and it's not really helping. If you really want to make a great service to everyone, be self-realized, and you do that by seeing a thought as just a thought. And that self-realization, it emanates, you know, as over the years I get more and more compliments about my state and what people feel I am and the way I deal with situations compared to how it was 12 years ago. And, you know, so, yeah. But, yeah, so that's just, in summary, yeah, these are the things that we can measure and our level of enlightenment, but to realize that we already are enlightened. And yeah, whenever you do treatment or healing or whatever it's going to be, or helping another, number one, to you know, bring it from the state of the truth of who you are as much as possible, but also realize underneath that person is already that, and not to treat people as this, because then yeah, you're just delaying it, and you're also blocking it for yourself. So yeah, that's not who you are. This isn't who you are, and this isn't who others are. You are this, and this is who others are as well. And in this realm, we're all equal, and we're all one, and that's where the word oneness continually gets repeated. When you strip away all the layers of who we think we are, what's left is this silent, still observer, and that's not separate from all its surroundings. It's one and unified with everything and everyone, and it is the life source of everything and everyone. And you are not separate from that, you are that. And that's what realization it keeps doing. And what I talk about in these videos is using the pathway of thoughts. There's something that's there, so why not use them? You know, we've already become masters of identification with mind. We've won gold medals in this. Now let's see if we can disidentify with them and smile at thoughts and not take them seriously. And it's very hard to do when you're getting a lot of nudges. So this is going to be a very gradual process, but see if you can do it, because ultimately this is always smiling. Without any nudges happening, what's left is but a smiling, peaceful life force energy. And that's why I do try to encourage in these videos smiling, not minding, and allowing, and all these sorts of things, because that's who your essence is already. And to sort of bring this into the thought, hopefully it will trigger that, and it will bring about the realization of that's who you already are. So yeah, thank you.